Great. Okay. Well, I'll make a start, and we will go on to part 2 of today's DNA lectures. And we're going to be talking in this one about marrying DNA and Irish family tree research. Now, does this clicker work? It does. Yes. So we're breaking through brick walls in our family tree, and you've seen this before. We've exhausted all the usual resources for identifying each of the ancestral lines in our family tree, and even after we have used all of these traditional resources, we're left with this brick wall. Now, in terms of Irish research, it stops at around about 1800 to 1830. You'll be very lucky if you can get into the 1700s, really. How many people have at least one ancestral line that goes into the 1700s on their Irish family tree research? Okay, quite a few people. How many people go into the 1600s on their Irish family tree? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm now counting them on one hand, you see. How many people go into the 1500s on their Irish family tree? 1. Okay. So it does get difficult the further you go back. But using DNA, we can break through these brick walls, and I'm going to give you an example of my Spearin and my Morgan ancestors. The 3 main types of DNA we've seen are the Y-DNA, the mitochondrial DNA, and the autosomal DNA, and I'm going to be talking a bit about all 3 types during the course of the presentation, but mainly Y-DNA and autosomal DNA, because from a genealogical point of view, mitochondrial DNA is the least useful of these 3 tests. And the reason being that the surname changes on the mother-mother-mother line every generation you go back in time. If it didn't change, then mitochondrial DNA would assume a lot more relevance than it actually does. But for Irish genealogical research, mitochondrial DNA is the least useful of these 3 tests. I'll give you an example of how we use autosomal DNA, because it is the one that most people have done. It's the most useful test, genealogically speaking. And I'm going to illustrate it by talking about the mystery of the wedding memento, and specifically my relative Ruby Kathleen Gleason. Now, there's 2 approaches to using autosomal DNA. You can use it to confirm a suspected relationship. For example, I'm sure that we're related to that crowd over there, and they've got money. Let's make sure that we actually can establish that connection, because you never know when it might come in handy. And then the second way that you can use autosomal DNA is that you can cast your hook into the data pool and see what you catch. And in that situation, only you are doing the test and you're putting it into the data pool. But if you're trying to confirm a relationship, then you and somebody else will have to do the test in order to confirm that relationship. So a couple of years ago in Dublin, my dad is going through his grandfather's paper and a bookmark falls out. So he reaches down, picks up the bookmark, and realizes very quickly, that's no bookmark, that's a wedding memento for David Patterson and Ruby Kathleen Gleason, married at Targominda the 23rd of March, 1893. And there's some lovely daffodils there, and the maker here actually is a Dublin address. So these were printed in Dublin and in 1893. But who is Ruby Kathleen Gleason? My dad says, I don't think she's one of ours. I'm going to put her in the shoebox and shove her under the bed. And I said, no, hold on. Let's not be so hasty. Let's ask Cousin Liz. So we arranged to have lunch with Cousin Liz, and Cousin Liz says, oh no, she's not one of ours. You can put her in the shoebox and get rid of her. And I thought, okay, look, I'm not happy with this attitude. So I'm going to do a little bit of research myself. Now, I had her marriage date, 1893, so I sent off, well, first of all, I said, I can easily find that in the Irish records. Targominda is probably some obscure townland in Tipperary. So you can imagine my shock when I found that Targominda is in the middle of the Australian desert, surrounded by poisonous snakes, man-eating koalas, Danny Minogue, and my personal favourite, sharks with frickin' lasers. So Targominda is literally is about 300 kilometres west of Brisbane. So I'm wondering, well, what the heck was she doing getting married on the edge of the Australian desert? And how did her wedding memento end up halfway around the world in Dublin in my great-grandfather's papers? So I managed to send off for her marriage certificate. And when that came back, it said that her parents were John and Anne Gleason. And I thought, well, that's fantastic, because my great-grandparents are John and Anne Gleason. It must be the same people. Because how many John Gleasons can there be? Well, it turns out that Anne Gleason has a brother called John Gleason, and they have a sister called Catherine Gleason who married a John Gleason. So there's 3 John Gleasons in the same family. It's a fascinating parallel, but it doesn't mean I can draw any firm conclusions. Now, it also said that she was born in Longstone, but my great-grandfather Martin Gleason and all of his siblings were born in Longstone, or the 2 neighbouring townlands of Tralee or Killascully. It says that her father was a hotel keeper on her wedding certificate and a farmer on her death certificate. My John Gleason was a labourer and he never set foot in a hotel in his life. So there's some discrepancy there between these 2 parallel stories. She was born about 1869, 1872, and so were my great-grandfather and all of his siblings. This Catherine here, born in 1868, could Catherine have become Kathleen? Born in 1869? Possibly, but I'm not sure. Now, we learned from her death certificate that she had come to Australia in 1886, and we knew that our John Gleason had died in 1885, perhaps putting the family on destitution, and the children had to be sent off to the 4 corners of the world. And we also had family lore that Timothy and Winifred had gone to Australia, and Winifred had had a daughter who was a concert pianist or a concert singer, something of that ilk. Now, that's as far as I was able to get, and we couldn't be certain that Ruby Kathleen Gleason was in fact Martin Gleason's sister. We couldn't be. We couldn't be certain that the John and Anne Gleason on Ruby's side were the John and Anne Gleason that we had on our side. So I built a family tree for Ruby. I put it up on Genes Reunited, and every 3 months I would go and check and see if anybody else on Genes Reunited had put up a family tree with Ruby Kathleen as a match in that tree. Nothing. 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 2 years went by, and then I found a match, and it was Ruby Kathleen Gleason in somebody else's tree, and I was put in touch with Ruby Kathleen's grandson. And Alwyn was in his 80s. We exchanged emails, struck up a conversation, and he was able to tell me some additional family lore from his side of the family. Ruby Kathleen had come over with her uncle and aunt, and they lived in Sydney. She also had a brother who later went off to the US and became a famous baseball player, and he sent them a watch. And there was an engraving on the back of the watch, and they can't find it. So close and yet so far away. So eventually I said to Alan, any other information? He said, well, yes, Ruby had a daughter called Alma who was an accomplished musician, and she excelled at the violin. So you can see that there's these fascinating parallels between the 2 family lores, but there's nothing, no single piece of information you can put your finger on and say, well, this definitely proves that Ruby and Martin are related to each other. And the 2 John and Anne Gleasons are exactly the same people. So we talked about DNA. Alwyn agreed to do a DNA test. If Ruby and Martin were siblings, they'd share on average about 50% within a range of, say, 40 to 57. First cousins would share that amount. Dad and Alwyn would share about 3% of their DNA in common. The DNA results came back 2.6% shared, well within the range of the second cousin relationship predicted by the genealogy. And I also came back with 1.5% DNA shared, bang in the middle of what you would expect to see. Is there a microphone? Ah, that's it. No, that's, maybe it's me actually. I will zip that down. There. So what the DNA testing proved in this situation was that Dad and Alwyn are definitely genetically related to each other, and the DNA suggests second cousins, and the documentary evidence suggests second cousins as well. There are many unanswered questions remaining, but the DNA is now helping us focus our research. Which of the sisters became Ruby Kathleen? Was it Catherine? Was there another sister that we just haven't actually found the record for? Ruby Kathleen was saved from the shoebox of obscurity. She is no longer residing under the bed. She has pride of place in the folders on the shelves. We have obtained a new cousins in Australia and vice versa. And just 2 weeks ago, I visited Brisbane for the first time, and I was taken out by my newfound third cousins to the grave of Ruby Kathleen Gleeson, and I am the only Irish relative to have visited Ruby Kathleen since 1886. So it's a wonderful circle of completion there. And it brings a lot of closure, I think, to the story. And I think it's great to feel that Ruby Kathleen is not forgotten, that she actually is remembered to this day. The other type of approach to autosomal DNA is the fishing trip. And again, you upload your DNA to these 5 major databases. And the secret of success is to have an online tree looking for surnames, locations, and individuals, collaborating with people one-to-one and in small groups. And that means having an email address and being prepared to share your information. And also remember that DNA is just a pointer. It points you in the direction of further research, and it always points you back to the records. So you cannot use DNA as a substitute for genealogical research. You can use it as a tool that enhances your ability to focus on the relevant records. It shortcuts the time that you will spend searching for the correct records for your ancestors. And the most important thing you can do is to share your pedigree. And in order to do this, you need to characterize each of the brick walls in your family tree. I've generated this on Ancestry, and you can see that there's still some brick walls there. There's some question marks here, but I've tried to characterize each of the brick walls on each ancestral line as best I can, and most of them stop around about the 1800 time point. When you share your pedigree with somebody else, ask them, do you see any common locations, any common surnames, any common individuals in our respective family trees? That's what you're looking for. Let's look at characterizing each of your brick walls, and specifically how you can use Irish records to do that. And it means looking at your MDKA, most distant known ancestor, and their spouse, and looking through birth, marriage, and death records for the address and the location of where they actually lived, because knowing the location is very, very important for consulting other Irish records. You also want to look at the witnesses on baptisms in particular, but also weddings, weddings of their children, and the informants on death certificates, because the godparents and sponsors at the church on the church baptism could very well be the brother or sister of either of the parents. And we'll be looking at Irish naming convention to see how you can predict the parents that you should be looking for the generation further back. So these all give clues to look out for in your matches family tree, and you'll need to document them somewhere. Now I've come up with this strategic approach to Irish records. Here's the timeline at the top, here's the current day, 1960, going all the way down to 1760. Civil registration records started in 1845 for non-Catholic marriages and extended all up to the present day. Everything else, Catholic marriages, or rather all marriages from 1864 onwards, births from 1864, and deaths from 1864. In Scotland, it all started in 1855, which was 9 years previously, and in England and Wales, it started in 1837. So you can see the civil registration started relatively late in Ireland. Now, before civil registration, around about the 1860 time point, church records take over in terms of birth, marriages, and deaths. We also have a full census for 1901 and 1911. We have census fragments from 1821 to 1851. Many of them have bullet holes in them because they were shoved in the windows of the General Post Office during the Civil War. So you might find that your great-grandmother is there, but she has a bullet hole through where she was born, and that's exactly the information that you need. So there's only fragments left for some counties in Ireland. Griffith's valuation stretches from 1847 to 1864, starting in the bottom of the country, going up to the top. But every year after that, or every 2 years after that, they had the land valuation books. And these books go to 1970. So if you know where somebody is living today, you can track back who is living on that land back to 1850s. Similarly, if you know where somebody was living in the 1850s, you can track forward in time to find who's living on the land today. Then we have valuation office books, tithe books, directories, street directories, very, very useful if your ancestor was a merchant or some sort of trader. We also have the tithe books, gravestones. Some people I know have traced back their family tree to the 1600s using gravestones. So they can be very useful, and they're all being digitized and put online as we speak. Wills and probate can be very useful, including going back into the 1700s. Newspapers, very useful for the 1800 to 1850 time point. And then court records as well, because neighbors often had disputes that they would be settled in court. So it's not just they all stole a pig or stole a hairbrush and were transported, as many people were, but neighbors having disputes will appear in these books. And of course, if any of your ancestors, and I know nobody has ancestors like this in this room, if any of your ancestors got drunk for whatever reason, they might also appear being drunk and disorderly in the court books and would have to be bailed out by somebody in their family. So it's a very useful place to get this type of genealogical information. The civil registration records are now almost all available online for free. Church records are also all available online, the majority of those that survive, on Roots Ireland and Irish Genealogy. We'll look at that. And most censuses and their census substitutes are also freely available online. So we'll take a look at some of these. And the links to a lot of these resources are included on my Genetic Genealogy Ireland website, which you can find at that link there. Like I say, this is being recorded for YouTube, so I'll put this up in about 2 weeks' time on my YouTube channel, DNA and Family Tree Research. I also did a similar, more lengthy discussion on these 2 years ago, but since that time, a lot of the additional information has come online because of ongoing digitization and certainly a huge effort by the Irish government to try and get these records available for you and searchable for free so that you can research your Irish family tree from the comfort of your own home. These are the main websites for online records. Irish Genealogy is free, Roots Ireland is subscription, Family Search is free, Ancestry and Find My Path are subscription, Ask About Ireland is free, Irish Ancestors is a subscription, the National Archives has a lot of useful stuff, and then Claire Santry's Irish Genealogy TOOLKIT is a useful signposting service to find whatever record you want to find. So let's first look at civil registration records, and these stretch from 1845 up to 1958 online. The Irish Genealogy website covers non-Catholic marriages from 1845 onwards, all marriages from 1864, births from 1864, deaths from 1864, within a time frame. So it's 100 years for births, 75 years for marriages, and 50 years for deaths. They're running a little bit behind. It should be 1918, 1943, and 1968, but currently it's 1916, 41, and 66 for births, marriages, and deaths, respectively. Also be aware that 10% of people in Ireland never bothered registering a birth, a marriage, or a death. So, for example, the travelling community, travelling around from place to place, a lot of the time they didn't bother registering a birth. So you will, for example, with John and Anne Gleeson that we saw earlier on, they got married in 1865, a year after civil registration was introduced. They never bothered registering their marriage. I cannot find it anywhere. So there is that consideration. Now you'll also find Family Search and Roots Ireland occasionally useful, especially for the more modern ones, beyond, say, less than 100 years ago for births. You can search the index on Family Search for births in the last 100 years and for marriages in the last 75. So Family Search is quite useful. And occasionally on Roots Ireland, for some reason, and I don't know why, but some areas actually have civil records all the way up to about 2005. So I don't know how that's snuck past the privacy concerns, but you might be lucky enough to actually find civil records going up to 2005. So it's always worthwhile taking a look on Roots Ireland. This is what you'll see on Irish Genealogy. Click on the civil records, sign in, accept their terms and conditions, and then it takes you to this kind of page. I've done a search for somebody called Pence. There are 2 births and 1 marriage relating to a Pence. and it gives you this kind of information. If we click on, you can also filter it by time period and by registration area. So you can see two of them were in Athlone, one of them was in Dublin. And if we click on Jessie Pence comes up. She was born on the 15th of November. Look down here. If we click on the image, it will take us to a digital copy of the original page in the birth register. And here is the original page in the birth register. And there is Jessie, born to John Pence and Annie Pence, formerly Hughes, I think that is. The great advantage of this particular format, because previously if you sent off to the General Registry Office, it would just give you the single entry. But here you have the entire page, so I can say, I think that's a H. Well, is there anywhere else on the page where there's likely to be a H? And then I can see whether I'm right in my guess. You can look through the rest of the handwriting to see if you could decipher the handwriting and whether this is a H or not. It probably is. There's an AP Hughes up there. There's a Joseph up there. Is that Joseph H? So it's useful for that reason that you get the entire page. And it doesn't give you a huge amount of information, but it gives you the address, and the address can be very, very useful for linking people together. And it tells you that that John Pence, her father, was a clerk. And again, the person present at birth was AP Hughes. Is that Annie Pence Hughes? It could be the mother, or it could be a sister of the mother. And again, it's present at the same address that they were currently living at. So that's an example of the birth record. This is an example of the marriage register entry that I get from the General Registry Office. It's just a photocopy, and it just gives you that single entry. But if you go through Irish Genealogy, you get a whole page, and it has about 4 entries per page. So there are advantages to getting the digital copy via Irish Genealogy, and again, totally free of charge. The strategy for getting civil birth, marriage, and death records, I'll leave this up. So if you're looking at this on YouTube, you can come back to it. But largely Irish Genealogy. Family Search have some of the earlier marriages free of charge at an affiliated library, such as the one that we have in the National Library in downtown Wellington. So they're an affiliated library there, and you will be able to get the Irish marriage records up to 1870 online there, and deaths up to 1878, I believe, you'll get at the LDS Centre down in the National Library. But everything else, you'll get the index online, but you'll get the index and the digital copy of the original image online on Irish Genealogy. These are the websites for the General Registry Office and the General Registry Office of Northern Ireland, in case you need to send off for a birth, marriage, or death, which is earlier than 175 or 50 years ago. These are other sources for civil register entries. I'm just leaving this up for a few seconds so that the YouTube video people can pause and take down those links, and you can go to them should you require. And then we're on to church records. Now, church records are very important for that period before 1864. How many people had ancestors who emigrated into New Zealand prior to 1864? Right, so there's quite a few people, maybe a third of the room. And for those of you, your ancestor will have missed civil registration. He won't have been in Ireland after 1864, so you're going to be relying on these church records to actually make the connection back to Ireland. And again, we're looking at church records that go all the way back to about, some of them go back into the 1600s. If you're from Wexford's town, if your ancestor was from Wexford town, you're in luck, because those go back all the way to the 1600s. Most of them start between 1780 and 1820, but some of them, particularly in the west of Ireland, Mayo, Sligo, they didn't start until 1880. So it's very, very patchy coverage, and it's a bit of pot luck whether you actually find anything or not. Most of the records are going to be Catholic records, because the majority of the country in 1861, 78%, were Catholic, but there were 12% of the population was Church of Ireland, or Anglican, and about 9% of the population was Presbyterian. largely centred in the northeast, in Antrim, for example, northeast Ireland, but there are also pockets of Presbyterians in Dublin and in Cork as well. So these are the kind of denominations, but there's also records for Methodists, Jews, Baptists, and Quakers. And a lot of these records are covered by just two websites, Roots Ireland and irishgenealogy.ie. Irish Genealogy is the same one that we used previously for the civil records. You just click on church records and that takes you to the church records site, church records section of the website. And again, that's free. Roots Ireland, though, is a subscription website. What I tend to do is put aside some time when I know I can blitz my family tree, a certain line of my family tree, and I just do all of the church records at the same time. I take out a month's subscription for €30. A day's subscription is €15, so it's better to go with a €30 for a whole month. But you do need to set that time aside. If you're going to do it for the entire year, it's something like €300, which is quite expensive. But it does have more than 20 million church baptisms, marriages, and burials on its website, compared to Roots Irish Genealogy, which is 2.8 million. Irish Genealogy covers Dublin City and Kerry, County Kerry, and also southwest Cork and Cork City, whereas Roots Ireland covers absolutely everything else in the country. So between the two websites, they actually give you relatively extensive coverage of the whole island. Now, we have to be careful with church records. Not only are they patchy, some of them have been destroyed because the first few days of the Civil War in 1922, there was a big explosion in the Public Record Office in Dublin, which destroyed 800 years of Irish history in a matter of several seconds. How we're going to commemorate that in 1922, or 2022, I'm not entirely sure. But there is actually a project called Beyond 2022, which is trying to reconstruct the library and trying to reconstruct a lot of the books and documents that were lost. Because it was such an important repository that other libraries around the world said, could we have a copy of this book? Could we have a copy of that book? So what this project is going to do is going to bring back digital versions of the books that were in the library in 1922, and you're going to be able to go online and see these books. Not only that, they're actually rebuilding the library. You can put on these virtual reality goggles, and you can walk into the library in 1922, walk up to the bookshelves, and open the digital books. So it's going to be a reason for visiting Dublin in a couple of years' time. I have to give that plug. And this is Irish Genealogy Church Records site. If we put in pence again in the search bar, you can filter it by, again, by a variety of different things. You can put in an extra name. So you can put in the name of the child's father, or put in the name of one of the sponsors at the baptism. And that way you can really filter it down. This particular result for pence is Julielmus Moriarty. Well, how can Julielmus Moriarty be associated with Pence? It's because Pence was one of the sponsors at the actual baptism. So the search returns not just the person baptized, it also returns the person's parents, or if the name was Pence, or a Pence witness at the actual baptism itself. And then at the very bottom down here, you click on this link, and it takes you to the actual image itself. And I thought I had a look at that, but we'll look at that in a second. And this is Roots Ireland now, so now we're looking at the rest of the country other than Dublin, Cork, and Kerry. And Roots Ireland is the free one, but it only has 2.8 million records. And again, Roots Ireland is the big one, it has 20 million records. Again, the search is pretty intuitive. You can filter it by the father's surname, father's first name, mother's first name. You can actually rebuild entire families here. If you knew that your most distant known ancestors were Patrick and Bridget, and that the family name was Doyle, if you just put Doyle in as the family name, and you look for all Doyle children born to a Patrick and a Bridget, then it's going to give you a whole range of results, and you will probably see some very well delineated family groups. And if you know that there was a particular location that they came from, you might be able to reconstruct the entire family that you're looking for on this basis using a clever searching attack. So there, the marriage form is very, very similar as well. Here's a church baptism for an Elizabeth Pence in 1840 in County Carlow. And if we click on view, then this is what we get. That's a transcription of the actual record, the name, the address that she was living at, Balladurdearneen, father, mother, and the parish that it was recorded in was Bagnallstown in County Carlow. And if we click on view microfilm of parish register and click on that, it takes us to this, and good luck. This is the microfilm from the National Library of Ireland. These are the originals. You can see that it's, you know, the parish priest is writing it down on his way home in the horse and cart, you know. So the handwriting is a little bit difficult to make out. It is arranged by date. So then you have to go back to the previous one. Okay, 29th of September, 1840. So I have to scroll down until I get to the 29th of September 1840, or at least September 1840, and then look for 29, and somewhere in here I will actually find the record itself. And then you can check the record to make sure there hasn't been a transcription error in that record, which happens quite frequently. A lot of my Spearans were written down as Sheerans, because a P is written like that. How do you make it like that? It goes up, down, and then round like that. So it could look like a H. So do check the original to make sure there has not been a transcription error with the knowledge that you have of your own family tree. And you can get these records are also available on Find My Past for a subscription. The search facility might be a little bit better. Similarly on Ancestry, there's a lot of church records up there. It's worthwhile looking to see if some church records are there also, because these databases are not comprehensive. Some of the records may still be lying in local custody and have not been transcribed or uploaded to these websites as yet. So if you don't find somebody, it doesn't mean they're not there. They may be there in a year's time or 2 years' time, so it's worthwhile going back and checking again. For Anglican records, you should visit the Ireland Anglican website, and there is an ongoing digitization project for the Anglican Church of Ireland records, so you may be lucky to find something there. They have a spreadsheet with links to the actual digitized versions of the records. You have to be careful, because 50% of the Church of Ireland records were destroyed in the Great Fire of 1922, so it was a huge loss. So we lost 50% of our records. The ones that are surviving, they're being slowly digitized, but those records are behind the Catholic records. They're not as well advanced in terms of digitization as the Catholic ones. Why is it important to know the names of the children of your most distant known ancestor and the order in which they were born? So you've got Patrick and Bridget Doyle as the parents of Thomas Doyle, and Thomas is your great-great-great-grandfather, and all you know about his parents is that it was Patrick Doyle and Bridget something, but we don't know her maiden name. Well, it's important to know the order of the birth of their children, because Thomas was maybe the oldest, and then there were 8 other children after him. Irish naming convention is a very useful pointer to what you might expect the generation above you're looking at. So if Patrick and Bridget are as high as you've been able to go, using Irish naming convention, you might be able to predict what to expect a generation higher than that point. So let's look at this as an example. Irish naming convention dictates that the first son is named after the father's father, second son after the mother's father, third son after the father, fourth son after the father's eldest brother, and fifth son after the mother's eldest brother. And similarly for the daughter, mother, mother, father, mother, mother, mother's eldest sister, father's eldest sister. So this means that the father's parents should be the first son and the second daughter. Similarly, the mother's parents should be the second son and the first daughter. So if we take the example of Ruby Kathleen Gleason that we've talked about earlier on, her parents were John and Anne Gleason. Ruby's older brother was Martin, then there was Bridget, Timothy, Winifred, Honora, Paddy, and Mary. Well, the first son should be named after the father's father. So the father's father should be Martin. I have not been able to substantiate that, but that's what I'm looking for. The second son, Timothy, should be the mother's father. And that, in fact, is correct. I have now got fairly good documentary evidence that supports that. The third son should be named after the father, but you can see here that, in fact, the third son is Paddy and the father is John. But I can see that in this household, the mother, Anne, is saying, look, we can't name him John. My brother's John, your John, Catherine's husband is John. There are just too many Johns in this family. Just give me a name. Think of anything totally different, totally unrelated, something exciting, something novel. How about Paddy? Brilliant. So he's named Paddy. So have they skipped the third step and gone on to the fourth step? And therefore is Paddy the eldest brother of John? Should I be expecting to find that John has an elder brother, Paddy? How about on the women's side? Well, the first daughter, Ruby Kathleen, if we assume she was actually Catherine rather than Kathleen, then she should be named after the mother's mother. And in fact, Anne's mother was Catherine. Similarly, the second daughter should be named after the father's mother, so we should be expecting Bridget to be the father's mother. And then the third daughter should be named after the mother, but the third daughter is Winifred and not Anne. So are they missing out the third step on the mother's side as well? And in actual fact, Winifred is the mother's eldest sister, and that turns out to be correct, that we actually have Winifred as the mother's eldest sister. So families didn't always stick exactly to naming convention, but they adapted it to their own needs. And you can see in this situation, it's adding some supportive evidence to the fact that Anne's parents were Timothy and Catherine. And I've since confirmed that by DNA testing of the descendants as well. So that's just an example of how you can use Irish naming convention to build a generation of potential ancestors, which will be very, very useful in terms of characterizing your most distant known ancestor on each ancestral line, and very useful when you come to comparing your family tree with your match's family tree. Does your match actually have one of those predicted ancestors in their family tree? So that's Irish naming convention. Here are some birth records and baptism records on Irish genealogy. And like I say, if we put in the surname and then the first name of the father and the first name of the mother, you can reconstruct entire family groups. And here you see there's 3 pages of Gleasons born to a Timothy and a Catherine. And these ones are all in Tipperary. If we go to the next page, we can also search by county. If we just focus on Tipperary, then in fact there is Winifred and there is Anne, Ruby Kathleen's mother, and these are all the siblings of Ruby Kathleen's mother. So again, it's another useful way of shortcutting your way through the records. And that's how you characterize each of your brick walls in your family tree. Now this strategy for Irish records is available in this supplement to tracing your ancestors that I wrote this year, in fact. I think it came out in April. And for a mere $8.50, you can get a PDF with searchable links. So I take you through that whole searching strategy for Irish records and the strategic approach. So that's available online if anybody is interested, and you can pour through the various records, not just the civil registration and the church records we've talked about today. There's also a couple of other useful websites. John Grenham's Irish Ancestors website is a great signposting resource. It can tell you what records are available and where to find them. He also has an associated blog, which is very, very interesting and useful. And then Claire Santry's Irish Genealogy Toolkit is also another very useful resource, and you see the link there at the end of the screen. She also has a book out and also a booklet on recently released records from 2011 to 2015. Facebook is another great resource, and there are now county genealogy groups for almost all the counties in Ireland. Here you have a group of people, maybe a couple of hundred, maybe a couple of thousand in each of these groups, who may have information about your Irish ancestors. It's worth posting your genealogical question on this Facebook group and seeing who responds. And you can break through brick walls in that way. You can also get people looking up local records on your behalf. So a very, very useful resource. We also have Claire Santry's blog, Irish Genealogy News, which announces each new record set as it arrives. And then we have two websites, the Genealogical Society of Ireland and the Irish Genealogical Research Society, which are the most active of the genealogical societies within Ireland, and you should consider joining them as well. There's also a group called Ireland Reaching Out, and they have an army of volunteers who will help you with your genealogical research because they want you to come back to Ireland and spend your money. So this is a great initiative that's been going on for several years, and again, you can get some very, very useful help from these people for free. Triangulating on specific ancestors in the last 5 minutes. 5 minutes? 10 minutes, and then questions. We talked about triangulating, and we talked about, here are your two ancestors here, because there's no television, they're triangulating on this tree, and they're really enjoying it, and it's been used in trigonometry and geometry for a long time. Here is how I used it in my family tree to make some rather astounding discoveries. And here I am here, and this is my father's side of the family tree, this is my mother's side over here, but I've tested my dad as well, and he goes back to Patrick Spearin and Mary Morgan on one of the ancestral lines in the middle of his family tree. So there's Patrick Spearin and Mary Morgan up there, born around about 1800. Now I discovered a few years ago that I had inadvertently collected several cousins who also descended from the same couple. There's Cormac, Kathleen and Owen, and they all go back to Patrick Spearin and Mary Morgan. Are you noticing the nice triangles we are creating with this type of looking back into the distant past at a distant set of ancestors? Well, I thought, surely I can do something with this. So what I did was I looked at all the shared matches that were shared between any two of the four cousins. So I compared A with B, A with C, A with D. Let's call them A, B, C, D. B with C, B with D, C with D. I did all the permutations, and I looked at any two cousins and the matches that they shared in common with each other. And I got 100 shared matches altogether that matched any two of the four cousins. 53 between Dad and Cormac, 17 between Dad and Kathleen, 13, 34, 15, 22. Put it all together into a spreadsheet, removed the duplicates, and I ended up with 100 shared matches. Now, the theory was that because they shared DNA with these matches, the DNA had to trickle down through Patrick Spearin and Mary Morgan. Now at this stage I did not know whether it came through the Spearin side of the family or the Morgan side of the family. It could have been either. So what I did was I wrote 100 individual personal emails to these matches asking a simple question. We're a DNA match, you match two of these four cousins. Do you have any Spearin ancestors or any Morgan ancestors? So I got 49 responses saying no, 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 no. You know, it took me a while to deal with rejection, but I did in the end. Certainly, alcohol helped. But the 50th person said yes, and I immediately fell in love with them. And they said they had a John Morgan in their family tree. And I said, oh, that's very interesting. They said, yes, he's on this gravestone here, erected by John Morgan in fond remembrance of his dearly beloved wife Mary, who died in 1879, aged 78. So she would have been born around about 1800. I'd assume that John Morgan was probably born around about the same time as well. And I thought, well, that's great, because my Mary Morgan was born around about 1800 too. So they could be brother and sister, or first cousins, something like that. So I said, well, can I have a look at your tree, preferably the online version of your family tree? Oh, we haven't started our family tree yet. So guess who built their family tree for them? And I couldn't find any connection between John Morgan on their side and Mary Morgan on my side. And I had to wait for 2 years for the 51st response. And the 51st response is the one that reveals everything. And this was a new DNA match, and it was another Morgan ancestor, and it was called Patrick Morgan, and he was with the Royal Irish Constabulary, and this beautiful sword that you see here is still hanging on a wall in Dublin. And he was born around about the same time as Patrick and as John and Mary, about 1812, a little bit later, and there were rumours in the family that there was a link to Wales. Well, Morgan is a Welsh name. I mean, it could be Irish. There are some Irish Morgans, but it could go back to Wales. I had no idea where it was going to end up. So I took out all the old research and I started Googling again. And I found a tree online that contained Patrick Morgan and his parents. There's Patrick Morgan, the RIC officer, and those are his parents, Edward and Jane. And I thought, well, this is great because the Patrick Morgan's descendant is going to be very happy that we've managed to push the tree back an extra generation. I can go back to him and I can say, oh, I found the parents of Patrick Morgan. And then I looked along the siblings and I found, oh, look, there's a John Morgan there, and he's married to a Mary. I wonder if that's the John Morgan from Limerick, who has the gravestone erected to Mary, his wife. And then I looked further, and that's when I fell off my chair. Because Patrick Spearin and Mary Morgan are my ancestors. So I thought, well, I have to check the sources for this, and there were no sources in the tree. And it had been put up in 2013. And I thought, oh no, is there any point in contacting the owner of this tree? Because I'm just sending this email out to the ether, and it's just going to disappear into a black hole, and I'll never hear from them again. So I wrote a brief message to the owner, and to my surprise, within 3 days, he replied to my question, what are my ancestors doing in your tree? What is your excuse? He said, because I have Professor Wardell's notebooks from 1906. I said, Professor Wardell, who the hell was he? He was Professor of Military History in Trinity College Dublin between 1890 and 1915, and he undertook a study of the Morgan surname in Ireland in the years before the big explosion of 1922, when he had access to all the wills, all of the documentation that we lost in 1922. Not only that, but there was a claim to the Welsh baronetcy of the Morgans of Tredegar House. And this is an extract from the notebook of Professor Wardell, and there are my great-great-grandparents, Patrick Spearin and Mary Morgan. It also says that Patrick Spearin was born in Ballingarry. I never knew that. This was new information. But not only that, not only had I pushed it back one generation, he pushed it back 5 generations to the Morgans of Limerick in the early 1600s. And not only that, this link to Wales pushes us back to 5 kings, 6 lords, and a duck. I think it's Duke. But it could be a duck. Keeping an open mind. And when I was in Salt Lake City last year, I went to the Family History Library. Oh, hold on. Have to show you my new house. This is Tredegar House in Wales. This is the seat of the Morgans for many, many years. Ballroom, parlour, and they're in the Dictionary of Welsh Biography. There's websites about the Morgans online. They're even on Wikipedia, and there are scandals and tales, and oh wow, juicy ancestors that are dying to get out of the closet. It even goes back to this chap here. From a pedigree of the Morgan family from Noah down to Sir William Morgan, a knight in 1612 made out about 1825. So now we've got at least Sir William Morgan in 1612, but it can go all the way back to Noah, apparently. And I'm related to this chap here. Sir Henry Morgan, governor of Jamaica, slave owner. So now I have slave owners in the family tree. So I have to assimilate that into the narrative. I'm also related to this person here. Any ideas? Correct. J.P. Morgan, Morgan Chase. So there should be money somewhere. I'm also related to this person here. And she is descended from the same Sir William Morgan, who was born in 1571, knighted in 1612. I am something like the 11th cousin of Princess Diana. And I was telling this wonderful story, because at this stage it's a wonderful story, and as my dad says, never let the truth get in the way of a wonderful story. And all of this has to be checked, of course. But I was telling this lady, the Irish Georgian Society St. Patrick's Day party, oh, I'm related to Princess Diana, you know, I'll see you at the wedding. And she said, oh, that's a coincidence because I've been invited and I have a spare ticket. And then, just as my hopes were sailing into the atmosphere, she said, but you can't come because you're going to New Zealand. So that's why I wasn't at the wedding, because I was coming to Australia and New Zealand. But otherwise, who knows what could have happened. So that really is, I think, where I'm going to end it for now. It really illustrates the point that if you wait long enough and persevere hard enough, and there is a lot of waiting involved, but if you do the research, put it online, let your DNA ferment, there will be more and more people coming and joining the database over the course of time, so that it is the gift that keeps on giving. And sooner or later, you're going to find a match that has the family Bible, that has rare documents, like these ones here, Professor Wardell's notebooks, that you're not going to find in the usual places, but they are going to put you in touch with ancestors much further back beyond your brick wall. And as you can see, it means you're going to have wonderful adventures in the future. Thank you very much.
We've got time for a few questions.
Stay away from that speaker because the microphone will erupt. So any questions then? Yeah, question here in the third row.
Guessing a bit clear, in your line of the children, when you were talking about the Irish naming conventions, there was a 4-year gap, whereas other gaps were 2 years, so do twins, one of each name?
That's a really good point, actually. Because when you're doing that naming convention, you have to get the order right, otherwise you might be making the wrong deductions. And there is a 4-year gap between two of those kids rather than the standard 2-year gap. So the question is there one missing? Are there two? Oh, right, so the boy and the girl, so the gap could be twins, a boy and a girl, who might have died actually, because twins were quite likely to die in those days. But, so then the question is, why aren't they in the records? And it could be that they just weren't recorded, or they died, they was stillborn, and they didn't bother. Well, they should have, I don't know, if it's a stillborn child, they didn't baptize stillborn children. So, you know, it could very well be that that's the reason why there is a 4-year gap between two children rather than a 2-year gap. And that should set off the alarm bells as well, and can be an explanation for why the naming convention doesn't fit the facts. Good spot. Question over here?
I've got a copy of an 1839 marriage of my great-great-grandparents in the Church of Ireland in Drumcree. No parents given, just of age. I can't get any further back. Is it impossible that I could find his birth? Is it likely?
It is probably unlikely, but what you can do is you can go to the Roots Ireland website, go to search by county, and in the online help tab, you'll actually find a list of all the records for that particular county, when they started, when they stopped. And that'll be able to tell you whether there are records available on that website for your particular dates of interest.
There's no record in that church in Drumcree because we've been.
Right.
So we wonder if he possibly came from another county.
He could have done, because the boundaries were changing all the time. So sometimes if a church closed down because there was poor attendance, or if a church had to expand because there were too many people coming, they'd build a new church and they'd recreate. The boundaries would shift and they might create another parish for that particular church. So it may be worthwhile looking for your ancestor in the neighbouring parishes, which means going to a website like Loganum, or going to John Grenham's website and finding out what church parishes were nearby. And you may very well find the record in one of those other adjacent parishes.
Okay, one more question.
Well, there's three questions here.
Oh, quick, quick. Otherwise you won't catch one.
There's a gentleman down here in the red as well.
Hi, recently I was told that Irish girls went to their mother for the birth of their first child. Is this true?
Sorry, say that again?
Recently I was told that a girl went to her mother to have their first child. Is this true?
Yes. Frequently the mother would actually go to a family member, or a family member would come to visit. So it could be the mother, or it could be an elder sister that actually would assist at the birth. Yep.
Okay, look, sorry, this goes back to the earlier session. Just a quick, to increase your chance of finding family matches, is it worth doing multiple DNA tests, given that I understand when DNA is tested, the DNA is sampled, so if you get a different sample?
It's not worthwhile doing multiple DNA tests on yourself. It's worth testing different cousins. So you saw with the Morgan example that I actually had tested 4 cousins who were usually about second cousins to each other. And that way you can triangulate back on a specific named ancestor. So it's better to do it that way rather than testing yourself multiple times. You may find minor differences if you test with different companies. It's not worth the expense. Test with Ancestry, transfer your results to the other companies. That's why you're swimming in 5 gene pools for the price of 1.
Okay,
Great.
Got to get your answer. All right. Thank you, Morris, for 2 very informative talks. I'm sure all of us here have been enthused to use DNA as just another tool in our genealogical record.